Good morning.
Hey, Stace.
I have to leave after an hour today, but I wanted to stop in.
Cool. Hope you have a fun weekend planned.
Yes, I do.
Excellent.
I've been having a lot of fun.
Good.
How
That's
are you?
wonderful. Alexa, stop.
Who is that? We have
Alexa,
a visitor?
she's Alexa.
That reminded me of, I have Mr. Rogers on the mind. That reminded me of like, someone's at the door.
Oh, I got four dogs for that.
Hmm.
Anyway, it comes to the door.
So when your dogs throw up, do they have is there an orange tint, or is it just my dog because of the medication he's on?
It depends on what they've been chewing on and what's gotten into their
No, when it's
digestive
just
system.
their bile, when it's just their bile.
They don't do that much.
Well, I have a rug and it's the one place that I really didn't want the dog to throw up. And for some reason I missed it, but I am so lucky because in the rug is the exact color and you can't see it. So that was my morning adventure. I
Uh,
feel blessed.
Somebody recommended there's a special bottle of Woolite something or other that does a pretty good job of removing stains and bacteria and
Listen, honestly, you really can't see it. I stepped in it. That's how I found out it was there. I was just
well,
leaving that part of the
I'm not
story.
sure that's a good thing or a bad thing, Stacy.
Oh,
You know, it's like the horse ran away.
no, you really can't tell. Well, actually, I did a good job of cleaning it, but if I don't feel for where it's wet, I wouldn't know where it was. So that's good.
Lay some tissue paper on it first, or paper towels on it first.
Yeah, no, we're good.
Okay, somebody else is here. Mr. Court.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Barry.
Hiya.
I was just saying I'll only be able to stay for an hour, but I wanted to stop in.
Okay. An hour's good. I only have about a 15-minute ability to listen. After that, it all goes into the bit bucket.
But what I've really learned is that it's there when you need it. I may think that I'm not going to remember something, and I've learned that no, when the time is right, that information will surface.
You do not have a listening disability like I do.
No, I'm a good listener.
Yeah. I had never, nobody in our family has good listening skills. I can tape record it and play it back 3 or 4 times and eventually get all the information. But real-time listening, forget it. It just goes, the phonemes come in too fast.
How did you handle that when you were in school? Like in
I
grade
took
school?
copious notes in real time. I
That's
took
what
as
I
many
did.
notes as I could, just like I used to do in Gertrude's session. I would write down a key word that was the name of the topic of the moment. If I didn't do that, an hour later, it's gone.
I did that too. It helped my memory. As long as I wrote down, like I never studied, but as long as I wrote down every word, then all I had to do is read it back at a later date and I'd be able to remember it.
The act of writing, what I discovered is I have to hear it. I have to see it if it's text. I have to write it down. Then I have to read it back and say it back out loud. I had to process the information through every sensory modality: sight, sound, hearing, talking, writing, reading. If I wrote it, if I processed it through all possible modalities, then I could remember it. If I only had it through some subset of modalities, forget it, it's gone.
You still need somebody to beat it into you, Barry.
No, wait, but he's making a joke, but I have a serious question because I don't think I get the same effect from typing it as I do from handwriting it. And being that you grew up, you probably know the difference. Can you remember if there's any kind of difference?
Well, the difference is that when I sat at a computer, I always typed. And if I was doing any thinking, I typed out my thoughts as I was constructing them. If I didn't do that, I go, wait a minute, I was thinking about this an hour ago. What did I think? I have to write things down and read them back, or else they're gone.
But I'm asking if you think there's a difference in effectiveness between handwriting
Oh,
or
the
typing.
problem with
'cause I think
handwriting
there-
is I read my own handwriting if I wrote too fast.
Well, that's
I had
different.
to print. I had to print, not write cursive. And if I printed, it was slower than typing, and so I would not have time to to print everything out or
Interesting.
scribble everything out. So typing is better for me as long as my typing
Got
doesn't get too screwed up.
Got it.
And by the way, one note on that, Stacy and Barry, is that typing is not just the fingers, right? It's actually the eyes seeing what's
Yes.
coming out. And
Yes.
that is also a big part of what you remember.
Yeah.
You know, not just the writing action itself.
The telephone was terrible. My mother would talk at me for 30 minutes every Sunday morning. And after I got off the phone, I had no idea what she was talking about. Somebody said, what did your mother say? I said, she talked at me for 30 minutes.
That's
said
really
the same thing
interesting.
about her mother.
What Sam just said is interesting because it would make a difference what kind of a learner somebody is. So for me, I do better with writing script. If I'm writing script, I'm listening to what I'm hearing and I'm writing it. And for me, that's better. Whereas for you, like you just said, you're looking at something and you're typing.
Right.
I think that's an interesting difference.
Yeah, it's a very important. I mean, Kayla said that when her mother talked to her or at her, Kayla didn't catch what her mother was talking about. And I certainly could relate to that. My father would get on the phone and he'd say, I love you. That's all he'd want to say. And then he'd get off. But 5 minutes is my father's maximum telephone talking time. My mother could talk at me forever. And I had no idea what she was talking about.
So by the way, another aspect of when I type is when I'm taking notes, I'm usually typing into an outliner, okay?
Yeah.
And if I'm able to think in an outliner, I'm able to indent, outdent, move around, etc. So the shapes of things
Right.
help with the memory and recall, okay?
Yeah,
So it's not
memory.
just the actual content of each line itself. It's the fact that, okay, there's at least a blob here that's about this, and there's a smaller blob here. And if I actually shift those blobs around, I at least know that the idea I was thinking about is with that larger blob, okay?
Yeah, Jerry
And that
Mikulski
helps.
demonstrated that he was doing it. Was he using the brain on that?
The brain doesn't allow you to do that, though.
What was the
Oh.
one that he was using, Stacy? Do you remember?
Who's he? I'm sorry.
Jerry Mikulski.
Yes, he uses the brain.
Yeah.
Yeah, he put up the screen, and as I was chatting with him, he was putting down little keywords about what I was talking about, and then connecting them with these little connecting links.
Yes.
And he says he needs to do that, or else he doesn't get it either. But I never learned to do it that way. I never even heard of the brain until GCC Zoom calls a few months ago.
Yeah. Okay. In the interest of some of the ideas we keep talking about, I'm going to ask about focus, okay? Because I've added a couple of items that came up during the week to my list of key barn raising notions, okay? I used to say it was about focusing and agreements and shared memory. I've actually added this week 2 more ideas to that, okay? One is listening, and the other is critical and systems thinking.
Good.
So that is a backdrop. I was still thinking there's a number of things I'd like to bring up. And one thing that came up this week, and this is just my idea, was this discussion around stage theory. Do you guys follow Nora Bateson's post?
Yeah.
Stage theory.
I had a look at it.
That's one that I think generated a lot of interest.
Yeah.
And to me, still is a little bit too politically correct. And I'd like to at least come up with my own position on this, but I was wondering if you guys would be interested in that particular topic.
I
But
would.
that's one. Anyone
I would
else have
be-
anything else?
I would need to have an explanation of what it is because I'm not clear.
Okay. Nora, I believe, or somebody, I forget who the original poster was, said something about stage 3 theory being bunk. It might have been Nora herself.
She called it BS and
Yes.
colonialism.
Colonialism.
Yeah.
Yes, right. And that generated dozens of comments. Okay.
Stage 3?
Stage theory,
Theory.
Okay.
Do you
as
know about
in culture,
Maria
Now
as
you go
applied to
through
culture.
certain stages of growth.
Maria Montessori and Piaget, I think, were two of the, and maybe, I don't know, maybe Dewey were 2 or 3 of the people who proposed that people learn in multiple stages. And I consider it stages of increasing abstraction, from the most concrete to the most abstract. I consider about 6 levels. And that's similar to the stage theory of Montessori and Piaget and Dewey and Kieran Egan, is that the guy's name? Kieran Egan, I think, is the other guy. There's a half a dozen people who were kind of mavens of the stage theory.
So does that give you enough context, or should I go back and spend a couple of minutes? I would have to find the actual link to the post itself. I just took a note here in my outline saying stage theory was a topic that was worth bringing up.
That's easy to do. You go.
Yeah, I know
Barry,
Barry's
yeah,
pretty good at
anyway.
this. You can probably
how to do
find it,
this.
Barry.
That'd be
you go
great.
You go to Nora's homepage.
Yeah.
And then you can search within her homepage. Let me just see if I can do that.
Yeah.
And
Anyway, while you're doing that, anybody else have any other topics to bring up for possible discussion today?
No, first back to the message of Nora. I didn't understand what BS means in
bullshit.
her.
Bullshit.
BS is short for bullshit. Yes.
You see, this is very helpful. And
I don't know what the German is. It's something close to Bullscheiße.
Dreck.
Better the Scheisse. Did I say that right? Heiner,
We have
Ferdi Scheisse?
We have bullshit all over. Second, because before Barry has a floor, what is the outliner you use, Sam?
I use Workflowy.
Is it an Apple or what kind of environment?
Any environment exists on Apple, Windows, Linux, web, anywhere. So workflowy.com. In fact, I'll send you a link to the questions that I use to debrief, because this might actually be interesting for you. Okay. So let me share this one. Enable link sharing. I'm going to copy the link. I'm going to put it into this particular chat. So if you click on that one, you can anonymously look at part of my outline. This is just a part of my outline. My actual outline is close to like 90,000 nodes now, okay? But this is just a segment of it. And you can choose to log into Workflowy, but you don't have to in order to see my content, okay? So these are the questions that I shared at the end of the last 2 barn raising sessions as kind of a focusing way to conclude and wrap up and transition out of a barn raising session. So this is just an example of what I can do in an outliner. However, yeah, go ahead.
Let me ask, this outliner is hierarchical, or is it something like in a quadrants, in a whatever structure, or is it multidimensional? And how is it hyperlinked?
It is a single hierarchical outline, and one node can be what they use. The terminology they use is one node can actually be mirrored anywhere else. So in other words, if I have a node called A and I mirror it, I put it somewhere else, when I make changes to A, then it changes also somewhere else, okay? So that's a very useful feature. And so it's strictly hierarchical, nothing fancy. It's extremely simple, therefore very fast, very easy to use. And I can really just go stream of consciousness in that particular outliner. I really love it. A lot of people want really fancy things like the brain. I've been trying to use the brain for 15 years, and I'm still not very quick with it. I am much quicker with this particular one. And by the way, I must also say, before I encountered Workflowy, okay, which I believe still is based on Doug Engelbart's ideas of outlining. It does exactly what Doug's outliner does, okay? Is that on Windows back in 1993, there was something called Echo, E-C-C-O. Echo Pro is what they called it. And it was from a small company called Arabesque Software. Brilliant people created that. It was the best outliner possible on Windows From then, probably for at least another 15 or 20 years, nothing came close to being as good until Workflowy came around. Okay, so I've tried them all. Literally, I've tried them. Anything that's significant more than just, you know, some toy somewhere, anything that's been significant, I've tried it. In fact, on Macintosh, there used to be something called living video text, something called Think Tank. I don't know if you guys remember this on the Macintosh. Tried that also, okay? Anyway, so today, my outliner of choice, until I or somebody else builds a better one, is Workflowy. However, there's a lot of work in this area right now. You know, Rome Research has come up with their thing. Athens has come up with their thing. They're all extensions of this thing called Workflowy. They all think that Workflowy is too simple. They're going more complicated. I think the danger there is when they go more powerful and more complicated, it's probably going to slow things down. I like Workflowy because it's instantaneous.
Okay. Who is a source? Is it Bob Horn or whoever? And how does it link to the original hyperlink idea?
I would have to study who the founders were. I actually don't know them, but the company is workflowy.com. I would have to look into who there has some history back to either Ted Nelson or Doug Engelbart, but I'm sure it's there. Okay, or Tim Berners-Lee, who of course links back to Engelbart as well.
I would be very curious to find out.
So now I'm going to write in my outline a little note to myself saying, find the source of Workflowy ideas for Heiner.
Yes, please.
Now, I won't lose it. I may not do it, but I won't lose it, okay? It'll have to get stacked up, you know, and prioritized with everything else, okay? But yeah, I'm curious myself, so I'll probably do this. Good. All right, Barry, did you find Nora's article link?
Yes, I went to her page and I did search and conversation or whatever, search and profile, and I put the link in the chat. It's Nora's Facebook page, and then and here's the astonishing thing: there's 1,100 comments on that post. 1,100.
Unfortunately, none of them explain what it is, because I just
Yeah.
read through it. So there's
Right.
a lot of comments. But
What I did, Stacy, is I just Googled it, and I think I went to the Wikipedia page, and it basically says people learn in multiple stages, starting at like age 2 or something, up
Right.
through maybe age 25 or something, and they're chronological, but the exact age at which you learn them varies from one person to the next. But Montessori, I think, had 6 stages, if I remember right, and there's variations on what you learn in each stage and what the boundaries between the stages
Right.
are.
thank you.
So the reason I found it interesting is because I think there are a lot of ideas that seem to be conflated here. I see a lot of prejudice. I see a lot of, let's say, aversion to prejudice. I see some political correctness. I see some clumping of ideas. And I was curious whether you guys would like to tease that out with me.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back 100 years because Montessori and Piaget are like the 1920s, I think, like 100 years ago. And then it sort of evolved. There was people proposed revisions to it over the decades.
Yeah.
So you have to say, which version are you talking about if it matters?
Yeah, Stace.
I saw an example of smart people problems on that thing. So if you guys want to
There's
discuss,
a lot of smart people problems on that.
I will stay quietly in the background and listen.
No, don't do that. Jump in with both, all 4 feet. Okay. I will.
Nah, that you know what? That's part of my way of dealing with smart people problems, or to get out of the way and let the kids tire themselves out.
So here's one idea I thought I'd throw out in this, okay? And let me see if I can start from something which is relatively uncontroversial, okay? I believe it is relatively uncontroversial that there is the notion of skill sets or knowledge that people can acquire, right? I can learn music. That's kind of a clump of knowledge all by itself.
Yep.
I can learn about, let's say, mud. Okay, so I have a lot of stuff that I can learn about mud as a kid. Okay, it's wet, it's slimy, it's cold, it's fun. You know, you can throw it at the dog. All these kind of things that I can know about mud. Okay, now if I apply it more towards, you know, what people are used to thinking about, I can learn about arithmetic. I can learn a number of things about arithmetic. I believe it's non-controversial to understand learning in those rough terms, right? So if I say I want to learn something about soccer, I can learn about kicking the ball, I can learn about running, I can learn about conditioning, I can learn about patterns, I can learn about, you know, communication, I can learn about plays. Those are well-described knowledge, bodies of knowledge, right? Is that controversial?
No.
The only thing
Anybody
that I
with me
would-
so far?
The only thing
Okay.
I would say is it matters between a skill and appreciation. There's art appreciation, music appreciation, where I can enjoy it, but I can't produce it. I don't have the skill to
Sure.
create it, but
Understand.
I could be a good audience.
Right. That would be a separate body of skill, right? So critics, you know, critique, you could argue is a skill set as well, but you know, the actual music production itself, that's a different thing. Okay.
Right.
So I'm saying if that is not controversial, then it is probably okay to say that as I go through life, I'm adding to my little bags of knowledge, you know, somewhere in me, right? Either in my brain or my mind or whatever people want to use, but I'm adding these little bags of knowledge. One bag about soccer, bag about music, bag about communication, a bag about relationships. Actually, I missed that bag, but a bag about, you know, other things, okay? So I'm trying to collect all these things. And once they're in there, these bags more or less, you know, are osmotic, and you know, things from one bag connect to things in other bags, and connections get made between them, right? So as I learned about soccer and I learned about music, there's various aspects of communication that are common across them, so I can actually see those connections being made between those two bags of knowledge. So I don't think that's controversial, right? The part that I think is potentially controversial when people put a lot of value into is by saying that, oh, if you know this bag, you're better than if you know that bag. I see a lot of prejudice along those lines. And that if you don't know this bag, you can't go to that bag. Now, I'm not saying that's incorrect. I'm saying that even if you pose that, you know, bag A is necessary before you understand bag B, that to me is non-controversial. What's controversial is for somebody saying, if you don't know bag A, you can't claim to know bag B, and therefore you're wrong, and therefore you're not as good. That value-laden judgment on which bags of knowledge are existing inside you, that's where I think things get value-laden. And when things get value-laden, all of a sudden now this word judgment comes along, and then values come along, and then therefore ranking comes along, and therefore better than or worse than comes along. And now all of a sudden you have elitism, and you have prejudice, and you have disrespect. Those, I think, are the ideas that are not quite so good, not quite so easy to accept. That's where I think, I mean, I obviously did not read all the 1,100 comments. Okay, I don't know if anybody did. But if I look at the overview of what seemed to be bubbling up, that's what comes to me. And that's why I think, I mean, maybe this comment is somewhere in those 1,100, okay? In which case, I'm sorry I didn't get there. But that to me is, I think that's something that's worth teasing apart. And I'll shut up now.
I just wanted to add, I think the critical thing, even when I only understood half of her message, was the last line on this is colonial. And she's so smart to put into one word or one connection so much load that for sure it could be even 10 times more reactions.
Yes. Yes. And that word now is no longer discussing this just in terms of learning models. It's in terms of cultural models.
Yeah.
and like imperialism and culture and colonialism. So you can make those parallels if you like, whether it's the East India Tea Company or whatever they're called, in India, or whether it's the US, killing off Native Americans, or whether it's the Middle East conflict. You can apply this all over the place.
Yeah. There's an unappreciated difference between teaching and learning. Everybody learns, but by different methods. And some people can learn very well with the aid of a teacher who inculcates knowledge very efficiently, very rapidly. But a lot of people are not well adapted to the classroom teaching model. They'd rather learn by other methods, either by direct experience or simulations and games, but not by having the expert inculcate the knowledge in the classroom model. And I think it's really important to distinguish teaching from learning.
I actually find that a surprising statement, Barry. I thought that was a very clear difference already.
It's not clear to a lot of people all the time. That's why you get preachers and sermonizers and professors who think that you're only going to learn this if some subject matter expert inculcates it. And if that doesn't happen, you're never going to come across it on your own. Nobody's going to learn calculus except, well, 3 people figured out calculus on their own. Archimedes, Newton, and Leibniz figured it out from scratch. Everybody else, to learn calculus, you got to sit down in a classroom with a subject matter expert and for 2 or 3 semesters, laying it out for you. And you can't learn calculus until you learn algebra. If you don't know algebra, you can't. The calculus doesn't make any sense.
That's right. That's where the algebra bag is necessary before you go to the calculus bag.
Yeah, I had, when I was tutoring calculus in undergraduate, they would hire the best students to be tutors that would meet the students after, in the cafeteria after class. And I had one student kept coming in, and he was very hardworking. And I finally figured out, even though he had earned an A in algebra in high school, he didn't know algebra. And it took me weeks to figure out that the reason he couldn't do calculus is he couldn't do the algebra. I said, where did you go to school? He says, a little town in western Nebraska. I said, how did you do in math? He says, I got all A's. I said, well, let's do an algebra problem. He couldn't do it. I said, you got cheated. They gave you an A in algebra. You believed you knew algebra, but in fact, you don't have the skill in algebra, which is why you can't do the damn calculus. I had to tell him that.
So is the point that I was trying to make made somewhere in those 1,100 comments?
Yeah, who's going to read them again?
What do you want?
Okay, this is a short conversation. I'll go off and have brunch now.
That's the whole thing is even if you read them, I would have to read them 2 or 3 times to pull everything out. It's like watching a really good movie, play it again, Sam. You want to watch it 47 times before you get all the details out of it, because some are just buried in the one-liner.
Is it play it again or play it?
He doesn't say again. He says, play it, Sam.
That's right.
What the name of the movie is the name of the
Casablanca.
Casablanca. It's the name of the movie.
Yeah.
It seemed to me, looking at the conversation, that there's a very good possibility that semantics played a role in some of the disagreement.
Yes, always.
Doesn't it always?
Yes, always.
Just pointing it out.
What does colonial mean? What does stage theory mean? What does bullshit mean? What does
my only comment, which is what I put in the chat, is that one thing that doesn't get valued, which I think should be assigned some value, is how well somebody learns. And that's throughout all the stages. And that's over all different subject matter.
Yeah. And there comes a stage where learning gets so bogged down that it never successfully completes. And that becomes your maximum skill level. It's like I was showing people a few weeks ago, that little Jibo robot, and he has a set of skills. He has a very limited set of skills. And I asked him, what's the temperature? And twice he gave me the definition of the word instead of the actual temperature. Depending on whether I said, what is the temperature outside, or what's temperature? And it didn't always know whether I was asking for the current temperature or the definition of the word.
So I gather you don't have an Amazon Echo or Alexa or a Siri device? Yeah,
Well, Siri, yes, but I don't use it because
right. Because those problems have been evident to people who've been trying to use these so-called smart speakers, which I think is a horrible name.
you have to be very careful on exactly how you word something so it understands what you're asking. And I realized that, if I slur the article, what is temperature, what's the temperature, what's today's temperature, it really matters whether it gets what I'm asking.
Anyway, for Alex and Colin, we started this conversation I did with a reference to Nora Bateson's post, which, according to Barry, and I think it's true, has drawn 1,100 comments now. And she made that post on the 10th. Today is the 21st. In 11 days, she's got, well, that's about 100 comments a day.
That's a lot.
I can do simple arithmetic, I guess. Okay. It's probably not linear. All right.
But it's actually a decaying exponential distribution, probably.
Who knows? Anyway, so that's where we were. I was trying to use that as a suggested focusing topic today, but evidently we just ran with it and we've not had others put on the table. So that to me is one possible example of how something stated as short as she did, and it is colonial as hell, okay, is kind of like almost designed to be clickbait.
Certainly it functioned that way. It really generated a lot of response.
Yeah.
And my friend Anne-Marie was very critical of Nora's attitude towards stage theory. But that was in a private conversation, which I can sort of paraphrase.
I find it interesting that some people actually refer to her lineage, her father, her mother, as a defense of her position. To
Well, yeah,
me,
she's promoting her father's theories. So
sure,
is Judith Rosen.
yes. But, that's an interesting argument style, which is, by the way, an interesting way for me. Okay, to me, it's interesting because somebody else, and I believe it was either Heiner or Thies, posted this Leighton's Presence article about how different argumentation styles and how different thinking styles apply to all this COVID debate.
Yeah.
And to me, one of these styles is exactly that, just, well, I'm from this lineage or I'm from that school, therefore you got to listen to me, that argument. And the one that I found really, really missing, although I could have missed it, okay, from that Leighton's Presence, or however I'm mispronouncing it, article, was it never actually really concerned itself with the truth. It's concerned with how people debate. It's concerned with how people think. It's concerned with how people take roles, whether they're I don't know, they mentioned 6 different hats, which I think Carl also mentioned about a year ago or so, but they never actually said, get to the goddamn truth. I find that curious as hell. And I find it interesting that one would actually want to defend a statement based on one's lineage. Now, I can see lineage applying when it comes to skill, but does it really apply when it comes to truth? I don't really know. I don't think so. To me, skill and truth are 2 different things. So I wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, there's a quote by a Zen Buddhist about, if you want to get to the plain truth, forget about right and wrong. Thinking about right and wrong is the disease of the mind. Have you ever heard that quote? I have it written down someplace if you want the exact quote.
There's many things that decry right and wrong.
Yeah.
Rumi does, the Tao does.
Yeah.
Even science does.
Well, yeah, I mean, in science, the axiomatic foundation is, do you believe in the scientific method and do you practice the scientific method? And does the scientific method, live up to its reputation or its claims?
My way of asking that, Barry, is, does it ever disappoint? See, the reason I believe in a scientific method is it doesn't disappoint.
Yeah, it has caveats. It's not guaranteed to succeed.
That's right. That's right. And as long as you follow that, and as long as you have common sense, which is not that common, it doesn't disappoint.
Yeah. What disappoints is people who claim to be following it, but depart from the protocols and don't realize that they're departing from the protocols.
Even that's not a disappointment. In my view, that's expected because people are people. What to me is a disappointment is people look at that and then say, well, there's evidence that you can't believe in science. That to me is the disappointment.
You can't believe.
Sorry, Alex has had his finger up
that-
for quite a long time.
You can't believe in
Just
people
as
who
I
claim
said.
to be scientists but don't adhere to the scientific method.
Alex, sorry to keep you waiting here.
I'm glad the scientific method wasn't established by the church because they have a method.
It was.
I'm disappointed.
That's
just-
right.
was.
Technically, it was.
It's called religion.
It was.
Religions were
When
the
Zero.
founding of the scientific method goes all the way back to
People-
theologians. They were the founders of what comes to be modern time scientific thinking and theory construction.
When they discovered that the Earth was not in the center of the universe, they didn't react with disappointment. They reacted with violence.
Yeah, because they weren't scientists.
That's right.
The
Not in
founders
the
of
modern
the
term.
world's religions were very scientific thinkers, but their successors were not.
Because they're arrogant and they thought they knew everything and they held their beliefs too strongly, not loosely.
Yeah, that was an issue because the scientist who discovered, I think it was Copernicus, he discovered that the Earth was not in actual fact the center of the universe, the sun was. He was treated poorly, but he established a new scientific theory through research and development, and he got scorned for it. He wasn't accepted as a scientific method. He
Copernicus
was
didn't get
criticized.
scored. He didn't publish until after he died. He
They
kept
put
his
him-
work secret and had his friends publish his book after he was dead. It was Galileo who got in trouble.
Even
Yeah,
after
Galileo.
he was dead, he got criticized even after he was dead for being
yeah,
a heretic. This is heresy. Heresy.
Yeah, it's because Aristotle supported the Ptolemaic model, and the church adopted Aristotle's work as the foundation for rational thinking. But
So
Aristotle made a
H-
couple of mistakes, 2 or 3 mistakes that are important.
Yeah, well, that helps me understand why Nora got so many comments.
Okay, so this to me is also another useful distinction between, let's call them religions versus science, okay? This is why I really argue with the people who claim science is just another religion. Here's the fundamental difference, okay? Science is open to improving itself.
Yeah.
Is religion open to improving itself? The only
Some are.
example of that I've seen, 2 examples actually, okay? 2 examples that I know of, leaders of religions. One is the Dalai Lama,
Yep,
who
absolutely.
says, if science disagrees with religion, religion needs to grow up, basically.
Yes, he
Okay.
says that. Yeah.
The other is the current Pope, Pope Francis.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's
He's
a
got a
scientist.
degree in chemistry, for Christ's sakes.
Yeah.
Okay. So those 2 have embraced science and want science and religion not to be at odds with each other.
Right.
Who else has been that way? And by the way, this is all very recent. Can you name another pope or another really significant religious leader up until these 2 that have had that open-mindedness about science and knowledge?
Maybe Maimonides, but that was like 800 years ago.
Okay, that's not in my bag of tricks.
I see a global population of 7 point something billion, and the yin and yang aspect of this is the believers in religion and the ones on the dark side are atheists and humanists and Buddhists. So you've got a big percentage in the white area in the yin and yang, in the dark and the light. In the light, you've got these people who claim to be religious and enlightened. That's the most bulk of the world's population, the Catholics and the Hindus, etc. And in the dark side, you've got the smaller percentage who believe in the scientific method. Well, some of them are religious too. but most of them are anti-religious, atheistic, and they're a small minority of the world's population, something less than 20%. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Why do
are
you
so
have to
many
ascribe
people-
light and dark to these?
Because it's the scientific versus the scientific's teachable. We improving all the time, right? But religion is not. Religion is stuck in a rut. Religion is dogmatic and stuck in a rut. You either believe or you don't. You're out the door. That's the difference that
It's,
I
it's
like
a
to
classic,
emphasize.
it's a classic metaphor, Sam. Have you ever seen the crest?
No, no,
of
no, no.
the-
Wait. Alex applied light to the religious side and dark to the scientific side.
Yes.
I was curious about that.
There's only two choices. You're either a scientific method advocate or you're a religious fanatic.
No.
And which group is larger? The religious fanatic group's larger. It's a huge group. Catholics and Hindus combined, plus Muslims.
The Enlightenment was secular, wasn't it? 200 or 300 years ago.
Yeah, I think so. So the
The
secular
Enlightenment
side.
chooses the word light,
Yeah.
and
So
that
the-
was sort of the
if you ask-
awakening.
If you ask the people in the light area whether they believed in yin and yang and understood yin and yang, the difference between one action versus a separate action, if you're working in the yin, if you're operating in the yin or you're operating in the yang, you've only got a binary choice. You're either in or out. It's like religion. It's like dogma. It's not like science. Science will tell you there's a grey area that's not understood, and that's the one we're interested in. Over.
Yeah. By the way, that's where Aristotle made a mistake. In his logic, he had the law of the excluded middle, that everything was a binary category. And the law of the excluded middle, I'm not sure exactly when you can say it was overthrown, but probability theory essentially overthrows the law of the excluded middle, that your knowledge isn't that it's either this or this. Your knowledge can be, well, maybe it is and maybe it isn't, and I don't know. And I have a degree of belief which can slide all the way from definitely this to definitely that, or somewhere in between. That was a huge development.
Yeah.
And by the
Not
way, in
convinced.
mathematics, kernel spaces represent some of this excluded middle.
Right.
And so you can actually describe it very well in mathematics.
Yeah. I mean, fuzzy logic, which is now called continuous valued logic, is only from around 1950 or so. And yet the human brain uses what's colloquially called fuzzy logic, degrees of belief, which
Okay, so let me pop out a little bit again, okay? And just make a comment. I think of all the different threads that I've seen, this one, going back to the Nora Bateson thread, might be a very interesting one to map out.
probably it's a lot of work, but yeah,
It's a hell of a lot of work, okay?
it'd take you
It
probably
would
a
be
month.
interesting for me to try and take like the first 100 comments or something and try and map it, because hopefully this space would have been at least outlined in the first 100 comments. I'm hoping. I'm not sure that it has, but
I've got about 2 paragraphs from Anne Marie that was in Messenger. She didn't publish it on the thread. She just recited it. Actually, it's because she's actually off of Facebook, but she's on Messenger. She says she just disagrees with Nora. She says stages exist biologically, cognitively, and spiritually. You can't rush development. However, stages of development are not predicated on arbitrary timeframes. We mature as we mature, yet they are within reasonable timeframes. No 1-year-old has ever learned to speak in full sentences. And then she goes, let's see. Between you and me, Nora is slipping on her father's name, as we've already mentioned that. I found that she is frequently driven by her emotions, a form of zealous missionary type of thinking. In short, I appreciate her and find her interesting, but not nearly as brilliant as her father.
well, now this is interesting here, because I know that I myself don't ascribe to this rule about not talking about people who are not present. I do believe that you just quoted something from Anne Marie. Did she send that directly to you, or did she send that to the actual post?
No, it's
thread?
in Messenger.
Okay.
And I would have asked her if I could repeat it. The thing was, on the same day, I asked her 2 things: that the stage theory and something else that Alex had posted. And she gave me a really long essay on what Alex had posted. And I said, can I repeat that? She says, yes. And I'd forgotten a week or two later which one I had asked her permission of. Turned out it was the other one that she gave me permission. She probably would have given me permission on this one too, but I'm not too much worried about.
Not the between you and me part.
Oh yeah, she would have said, don't put that out there. But it's pretty clear that Nora is a missionary for her father, as is Judith Rosen, as is a lot of people.
Right. That's why it caught my ear was it true that when you quoted her, it was this between you and me phrase?
Let me just
Is
go
that what
back.
Stacy picked up on?
It was.
Let me go back and see if I can.
While he's looking
Yeah,
for
surfing
that.
on her father's name, but it's clear. It's not between her. Everybody knows she's surfing on her father's name. I mean, it's not like it's a secret, you know. We all know that.
Yeah, but to actually say it outright is kind of, emotion and value laden.
She's got the Bateson Foundation, for God's sake. That's her whole mission, is to proselytize her father's work.
Yeah, but if somebody doesn't believe in something, they're not going to make that their mission. So, to me, I don't know.
Did you see the 1 hour video that she made about her father?
I get that, but I also believe that she believes everything she's saying. I don't think she's doing it as a sales pitch.
Oh no, she does believe it.
Okay, Colin's been waiting for a while. His hand is up. Colin, are you there?
I'm here. I am here in spirit and body and mind. And I don't know if there is a difference between the spirit and the mind.
They overlap.
The duality question's another one we haven't really. The duality of the mind and the brain. Is there a difference? But within that question, the better question is back to Galileo and him bringing a guidepost of knowledge. So when we're talking about the law of the what is it, the extracted middle or the
Excluded middle.
Excluded middle, extracted middle, yes.
Excluded middle.
Yeah, excluded, extracted, not valid. Because it's either A or B. Now that has to do with truth, right? Not whether your interpretation is true. Barry's talking about your interpretation can't follow the law of excluded middle. That could be, because we don't know for sure, unless, well, we have guideposts. Now just hold on, Alex, I got a point to make. And that wasn't it. I'm leading up to it. The point is that even after science puts a guidepost in, now Sam mentioned bags at the beginning. I'd like to change bags to guideposts. And how deeply are they sunk into the ground?
No, they're bags.
Yeah. Well, inside this bag, I take out a post. And this post is very long, depending on the confidence of how true it is. So that guidepost gets nailed into the ground, deep pile drive down in there. And somebody with lazy thinking thinks that they can just come by and pluck that out of the ground and say that's no longer a guidepost. Like that's what interpretation does to the truth. So I'll give you an example explicitly. Galileo. There's two angles to look at this, two ways to look at the ocean with the fisheye. One is the actual people who were in the know. What did they do? And they were the Catholic Church, and it took them 500 years to apologize to Galileo that he was actually right. That's one. That's the officials, the authority. Now, how about the followers? How many of them still don't know about this guidepost, or don't look at this guidepost, or don't even care? Doesn't even matter. So there's one thing, you got the academics, the teachers, the authorities, the people who actually shouldn't be ignorant and to their own devices either act willfully ignorant or correct their ways based on respecting how deep that guidepost is laid into the ground. So that's the point. Do we follow guideposts? Do we even know where they are? And do we acknowledge them? Or do we just willy-nilly, oh, that doesn't matter, and all gods are the same, and there's many ways to truth and all that? Emotional stuff, which probably has a place, but not in the science domain, not when it has to keep the plane in the air. Maybe when it has to keep people in trauma in a path that they're coping. I don't know. I'm not in trying to fix I'm not trying to smooth over reality for people so they can cope with it. That's if I get into that position,
And Colin, your
then I've got to
network bandwidth
recalibrate
appears to be
completely,
a
because
challenge.
then I don't find I'm in that space here. And okay, so all I'm saying is that I don't feel like I'm in a space where I should be consoling people. I feel like I should be sense making and looking for guideposts and discernment. And that means defining things within context. And people who don't want to get down to the details of context frustrate the hell out of the conversation, as far as I'm concerned, because it comes down to picking a premise and defining the terms around it so you can get to the deeper understanding. The words are a gateway to the understanding. The words are not the understanding. The map is not the territory. All right. And the warm data is nice to get while it's warm. And if we can't look at the warm data, like, I get very frustrated because I'm sure I'm misinterpreting what Doug says. But he says, don't look in the rear view mirror. Well, I would like to know what he means by the rear view mirror. Sam also, I see, having difficulties. And one of the ones I feel is, what am I allowed to bring into the conversation? And what, if I bring into the conversation, am I contaminating the conversation with Doug in unblocking? So where are the guideposts in unblocking? There are none. It's just dream it and it will come, the field of dreams. That's what I feel there. And okay, if we're going to dream, let's do an experiment where we have a context wrapped around dreaming so we can, now maybe I'm missing the whole point here of meditating and letting everything go. I don't know, but I do know that if we don't have guideposts, then we don't have much direction or something to remember. And it took them 500 years to acknowledge that Galileo actually had a fact, and they could get over their emotions of being wrong and their hurt feelings of narcissism crumbling, whatever their problem was. The Catholic Church is very arrogant. And I'm sure they do a lot of good things too. I don't want to shit on religion. I just want to say there's examples out there where science has not been respected for the guideposts that it's laid and can show you how they laid it. Now, that has to do with hard facts. There's also the soft facts. And I guess that's where interpretation of value comes in. So that's where we kind of have to have soft skills and even more conversation skill to get through to understanding, because there are different interpretations. And I'll just leave it there because I'm probably way over my time. But yeah, do Catholics even respect the fact that Galileo is right? Do they even know about the conversation? I know I lived with somebody who I had to show from Google. They were a very intelligent person, actually taking political, studying, what do they call it? Political science. They didn't know. He didn't know. Anyway, go ahead, Sam.
I mean, I was going to take you up on it when you said that's probably enough. Because Alex has been waiting for a while, and then
the fact is, somebody who should know didn't.
I think we did hear that.
Yeah,
right?
and then once I showed them, they just say, "Oh, I guess the Pope does agree," and it was like, who cares? It's like, so that wasn't a guidepost for him, obviously.
I was intrigued by the aspect of scientific research and turning the microscope onto some issue to find out how much truth was in it, truth being subjective. And I discovered through my experience with Alcoholics Anonymous that the church wasn't interested in redeeming alcoholics for hundreds of thousands of years, because they believed that alcoholics were not curable. They were possessed. They needed to be excised of their demons before they'd get better. And some did, but what I realized was that you could get sober in AA without falling to the religious dogma. Without accepting religious God or the woo-woo, you could get sober just simply by believing that there was a power in the universe greater than yourself. And
Or
so,
that power is yourself, perhaps.
well, it was the way you think.
That's not what they say, though.
Yeah, well,
Potato, potato. If Alex is healthy today, I call it a win.
No,
AA
Colin,
got-
the 12
AA
steps
got-
specifically
they got a lot
contradict what
of
you just said.
they got a lot of religious people in the movement.
No,
People
I
who
didn't.
are dogmatically fanatical about their religion got into AA and infested the thinking. You know, they got the religious aspects of the traditions changed through their power of vote in the meetings. So that was an issue that I didn't agree with. Because if science is the way to go, then self-analysis enables us to realise what our defects and faults are and improve them. And that's what I did in AA. I didn't believe the religion, and I got ostracised because of my atheist views. But I maintained this belief that I was onto something, and so I'll leave it at that. Over.
Okay, so let me try and connect it to why I brought up this topic in the first place, okay? Because I think the underlying theme here that's crucial for me is this one about truth. And whenever the truth is brought into question with phrases like my truth or subjective truth, that's when my bristles go up. And when statements like this is BS, it's as colonial as hell, there's a lot of value that's mixed up in those statements, which is a different dimension than truth. And you got to tease it apart. And if you want to deny the truth simply because you don't value what's implied by it, or your values contradict what it's implying, to me, that's not critical thinking. That's not systems thinking. And that's the little schism I'd like to identify in there. And like I said, tease that apart. You can talk about values all you want, but don't conflate that with the truth. And don't conflate experience with the truth. Please don't do that. Call it experience. Then my ears are wide open. If you call it the truth, I'm probably going to disagree.
Is that that's a distinction in confidence though, right?
No.
Confidence, it's true.
No, I'm talking about the difference between values and truth.
Well, if somebody says it's true, then they're confident it's true. And if you
It
question
doesn't
them,
matter. That does not affect the truthiness of it. Whether or
so
not somebody
then-
is confident or not.
Right. That's right. But that's not how they see it. So that's why I see it
That's why I'm
sometimes like,
saying it's a different thing that we got to tease apart.
that's why when Anthony Magnavasco is challenging people on what they believe or asking them about what they believe, he'll ask them, and what confidence level do you put on that? And a lot of them will say, oh, I put 100%. Well, then you have a problem with that. And they say, well, how do you know? And they say, well, that's my experience. And now you've just proved your point, but to them, they've proved their point too.
Okay, so let me just respond to that, and then I'll relinquish the floor. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me take back slightly that thing I said about confidence. The scientific community does have a level of confidence that is a bar, and I believe it's in the 5 zeros or 5 sigmas. I don't know what it is. Okay, but there's something very, very high standard that's out there that is applied to the scientific method for it to be quote unquote accepted, so that it then moves on. And even then, it's still valid to question if you've got contradictory evidence from a different experiment. So that is where confidence does apply in the scientific method, but it does not apply on a subjective basis. just because I subjectively believe something with high confidence is irrelevant to the truth. That's the point that I wanted to make. Okay.
And I agree with you.
Sorry, I think there's two other people with their hands up. So there's
There's a
Barry
distinction to be
and
made, though.
There's Alex.
I don't know who was before me.
Barry, I believe.
Yeah, the thing about truth is truth can be very simplistic and also time varying. It's true that the air conditioner upstairs doesn't work. It's also true that the air conditioner in my car wasn't working last week. That's true, it's undeniable, but it's not very useful because there's also a model of what is an air conditioner, how does it work, and why does it stop working? Turns out that in both cases, there was a leak in the refrigerant lines, and over time, the refrigerant leaked out and it stopped working, but I could recharge them. On the other hand, if I don't fix the leak, the recharge is going to eventually leak out too in a certain amount of time. So what's more important to me than the truth is a model that I can compute with, that I can use the model to diagnose and change the state, change the truth value of it's not working, it's broken. So this gets back to stage theory. The version of stage theory that I ran into, I think had 4 stages. And the 4th stage was like, it was called formal operations. Like, what the hell is formal operation? What is stage 4, formal operations? And so I asked Anne Marie about it. And she says, here's the thing about stage 4, formal operations. It's preceded by concrete operations. If you have not experimented, you cannot do formal operations. Even the most abstract thinker observes and tinkers, at the very least, does thought experiments based on observations, as Einstein did so well. So then she goes on, she says, stages are stages because you move through them of doing and thinking to the next level. It's not colonial or patriarchal, it's just development. Everyone matures at different rates, but within reasonable blocks of time, and with the exception of some outliers. So I can have a very simple-minded truth. Air conditioner doesn't work. That's not terribly useful. I'd rather be the next stage. I'd rather have a model, which is not the truth. It's an approximation, but it's useful because I can use the model to diagnose the previous truth and change the value of the truth. So getting from concrete to increasingly higher levels of abstraction, where you can do diagnostic reasoning and tinker constructively to change this truth value of something's dysfunctional to something's functional, that's really important. And most people don't get to the point where they can get beyond it's not working. They can't say it's not working because, and then give a diagnostic analysis that's based on a model. And I think that one of the problems we have in our culture and why we have people who don't believe in science is they don't understand what's a model, how to get to a model, how to exercise a model, how to use predictions and diagnostic reasoning within a model to change the state of the world to improve it. That's why I think people don't believe in science. They don't know what the hell a model is, or why it's useful to have them. I think I'll stop there.
Anybody who worries about the weather tomorrow has got to be concerned about that in some way. Anyway, Alex, I believe you're next.
I'm interested in this belief thing because like the weather's unpredictable, but I believe tomorrow will be fine. It doesn't make it so.
We're gonna have a hurricane here tomorrow.
Yeah. So the difference between truth and belief is significant, and it is the scientific area of discussion that I think should be opened up a bit. It's like an individual believing they were created instead of evolved. There's the difference between a religious person and an atheist. And they both have beliefs. I mean, the atheist might say, I believe in science. So that's the part that's interesting because science is improvable, like Sam said. It's based on evidence and it's continually being updated. Old issues, old experiments that weren't proved to be wrong, but they were superseded by new data. Over.
Do I get to go?
Yeah, I think you're next.
Okay. Barry, you said something that I think is very interesting, and it's very pertinent, by the way, to my professional day gig. And the reason is this. Up until now, most databases that are used in software have had this model where you have these structures in a database and it exists so that you can update what's in there. Okay, you can change the values of what's in there because the world changes, right? So you can say today the car is, hot, tomorrow the car is cold. That's what databases let you do. They let you collect this stuff, okay? And in software, change of value is called state.
Right.
And in software, changes in state and not tracking them properly is a huge source of errors and bugs.
Absolutely.
Huge, at least 50%, if not higher, of all bugs are introduced because you don't manage state correctly.
Yes.
Whether it's race conditions or write errors or whatever the hell you call it. Which is why in the last decade, it's come to prominence. Actually, the work started 30 years ago, but just in the last decade, I think it's become viable. Is that there are these, and I'll say, I'll call them write once databases, okay? In other words, these are databases where values do not change. But each update to the database gets a transaction ID, which is basically a timestamp. So it says this is true at time whatever, T1, T2, T3, okay? So if you say X is true at time T1, then you say X is true at time T2, okay? That's fine, you can still reason about that. If you say X is false at time T3, again, these two previous facts do not disappear. But the notion you have of transactions and time allow you to make correct decisions even based on a write once style database.
Yep.
That is currently pioneered by something called Datalog, which is the query language, and Datomic, which is, as far as I'm concerned, the most sophisticated version of a Datalog implementation out there. And that's where I'm fundamentally, trying to gravitate towards, because, that's the model that I'm seeing has huge value for future. And that's why I want to build all of my subsequent systems on. So when we're talking about truth, when we're talking about things changing, when we're talking about modeling truth, one of the most effective ways to model it is to build in this transaction or this time dimension into the way you correctly gather your shared group memory, your knowledge base. It is not invalid. In fact, it is very valid, okay, for someone to say Earth is at the center of the universe in 1278, okay? That might be completely valid. That worked for them.
Right.
In 1950, now that's no longer true, okay? But you don't go back and delete the fact that in 1278, they believed in this.
Right.
This is why Engelbartian, and I believe this whole notion of write once is very Engelbartian, okay? Engelbart said, never delete shit. Sorry, he didn't say shit. He said, never delete, okay? And this is another reason why I really want to draw these parallels between what people are doing now versus what people were doing back then. Doug was thinking this 50 years ago. I was thinking, this is how we build shared collective memory. If I go back and delete something that Barry wrote because I didn't like it for some reason, that's doing a disservice to the rest of the community. It is fact that Barry wrote something. It should not be allowable for anyone to delete what was true at one point. This is fundamental, I think, to shared collective group memory. And I think it might be a subtle point, but to me, it's a very important point. And I'm sorry if this was too technical or too pedantic, but I'll shut up now. Okay, thanks.
Leads to schismogenesis. This is another Bateson term.
So if we talk this topic to ground,
Well, we could talk to for 1,100 comments worth, but not in not in an hour.
again, I'll confess, I didn't read all 1,100. I tried to read several dozen, but I didn't read all 1,100. Okay. In
But
fact, here's what I would, sorry, Barry, I'm going to take this particular recording, and unless anybody objects, I'm going to actually post it as a comment on Nora's thread and see if a bunch of people come and tell us how we're wrong. Okay.
Well, I'm sure
I would
we'll-
actually welcome that.
What'll be interesting, Sam, is how many people actually view it. You get a count of the number of views on YouTube
I do. Typically, we get between 20 and 30 views.
by
Not
different.
very many get more than that. Some get 60 or 70 or some more than that. Very few get more than 100.
Can you tell how many different people viewed it as opposed to how many times any number of people viewed it?
I think I can slice by that, yes.
That's important because I will watch the same video multiple times if I'm trying to get a lot out of one video. But
The algorithm counts the IP addresses where the views came from. If they're a virtual private server, I think they're counted twice, or multiple counts. But if they're coming from an IP address it can identify, and it's a repeated view, it's only counted as one.
That's important.
I don't think that's true because I view it more than some videos more than once, and each of mine gets counted as a view.
Well, then it's easy to inflate the view count.
I'm just trying to tell you what I observe.
Just depends on whether your ISP generates some
Yeah.
fresh IP every time you reboot or not.
If you're getting paid for views, then you can be a rich man if that's not corrected.
That's a common problem with clickbait.
Yeah. If you're on a cell phone, you get a new IP address pretty much every time. Desktop computer to an ISP, you might keep your same IP for a long time.
I wonder if you can fix that with a signature directly that's not related to the IP address, but is related to the individual communicating.
Yeah, it also can
Yes.
record your browser ID, but I've got multiple computers in the house, so they all have different browser IDs. So
Okay. Anyway, I'm not hearing an objection, so I will post this video on that thread, and we'll
I'll make
see.
a prediction that if it generates a dozen views, I'll be surprised.
I probably would be as well. It's going to be lost in noise after 1,200 comments. Okay, Colin, you got your hand up.
Yeah. So back to where I was cut off because we were in a conversation about perspective on what truth is and what science is to an individual and whether it matters and what guideposts they have to guide them, be it teachers, things they've read, basically what they know. If know is a valid word here, I assume it is. So when it's a personal matter like Alcoholics Anonymous, then I assume that's a pretty specific group of people. That's not really going to get into the school system too far. That's not going to really affect my life any. I'm not worried about Alcoholics Anonymous growing to help people with alcohol reach for some kind of higher power, they say, to help them because they're obviously out of control. They've come for help. So they use what cognitive tools they have. And I guess there's a step process that they use. They've got their guideposts. If some people want to latch on to religion, that's great. Like, because a lot of people are religious because of their upbringing. That's personal. So I filter that out of this space completely. If that conversation starts, I'm wondering why. Okay. Why are we talking about Alcoholics Anonymous? If we're talking about religion, I'm wondering why. Why do we need to talk about that in this space?
It's in the context of truth.
Well, then fine. You've entered a premise. Then there's something to latch on to. So I see three different buckets or bags. One is standing beside, observing, and asking Barry, have we checked enough null hypothesis yet to move forward? Or are we still a null hypothesis? Can we expect that what we're predicting is going to have any effect at all? So we can measure that. That's a lot of detailed work that is shunned by some parts of the GCC, that kind of a mindset. So we never get too far using that tool to unblock truth or mistruths. So there's the personal side, and then there's the scientific side. And I've made this point many, many times. And I feel like I would like to know the context of the conversation, because if it's going to be a personal one about meditation or spirituality or, dancing or, playing music, if that's what we're going to do, then that takes me into a completely different space than what I consider global challenges is. And Heiner has an expectation when he comes here, because I know when he's pleased and when he's happy. And I watched some videos of him starting with Fleming and Tammy and a bunch of stuff. And people said a lot of things. And now we can go back and review that. So I find getting back to the point of what we're trying to do or say, our message is what we should be focusing on, as opposed to being philosophers. And we can philosophize some, of course, but the scientific method doesn't really require anything other than, a protocol, right? So the protocol is I should stop talking right now and see what you guys think about keeping on focus and not worrying about religion unless it is in context. Name your context, then your terms, and we'll go play with the terminology sheet, because that's in my mind. And on my tool, actually, I'll show you right now with 20 seconds, that if you go under here now, there's the GCC term team, and right at the top is, if it works, bang, the terms. Anyway, that's it for me.
Thank you, Colin. I think we were with Nora, and her very short 4 lines messages were so deep and intriguing, because she has a sister, she has a mother, and she was able to really trigger and open so many interesting doors. But I think it is part of our moderator, Sam, just guide us a little bit, who is in the room, like Kayla and Josh, and not really rambling around whatever comes into your mind.
Everybody will moderate differently. I moderate so that we can actually still gravitate around this idea of truth, and where truth can be understood in a community sense, in a group sense.
To me, it's got an aspect of common sense when you think about truth and belief, because if you believe something's true, that's related to your subjective experience. So believing something's true is not necessarily going to prove anything. You have to have some evidence. You require to change the scientific opinion. So to Colin's question, if you have a group of people who with consensus, scientific consensus, they'll tell you that there's an electron with no mass, just a field of energy. So that's a curly one to throw into the pot. Anyway, over.
Hey, Josh, you've been here for a while. Any thoughts?
On the truthiness conversation?
That or anything else?
Oh yeah, I'm super excited about the AI day. I wanted to talk to you about that. I don't know if you watched it though.
No, I haven't. I've been really busy.
Name of it, the AI.
Oh, okay. That's my only thoughts, but I don't want to take away from the conversation. So
I saw your message, Josh, and I tuned in, and after about 30 minutes, he came on stage, and it's pretty interesting stuff. It talked all about the navigation discussion we had, Barry, about how they were doing it. It was fascinating. what they had to do and the mistakes they made and backing up. And yeah, it was very fascinating.
I missed the name of the item, the AI what?
Day.
Day.
DAY. Actually, you call him, now that you bring up this backing up business, I think I posted, I forget exactly where I posted this morning. There's a video from the Perimeter Institute. It was Professor, I forget his first name, I think his last name is Livio, Livio. I think he wrote a series of books. I got one of them. It's called God as a Mathematician or something like that. But his latest book was something called The Brilliant Blunders in Science or something like that. And so he had an hour and 15-minute lecture broadcast by the Perimeter Institute. And it's really good. He talks about Darwin. He talks about Einstein. Who's the third guy? I forget exactly who the third guy was. But he tells a story about why science is presented so cleanly in school and how obviously it doesn't happen that way in real life, and about how all the turns and zags and zigs and obstacles and persecution that happens to real original scientific thought. So I posted it in light of this one little story that he told. And the story is about something called the barometer problem.
I love
And I've never heard of the barometer problem.
Oh, yeah.
I'll give a 30-second summary form of it. But if you go to this video, you'll see it. In test, there was a class one day, and the teacher said, okay, there's a very tall building over there. Here's a barometer. How would you tell me the height of that building? And so one student's grade was marked wrong and he objected. And so they gave this to another teacher to say, okay, well, why did he object to this grade? And so the second teacher talked to the student, and the student gave him 10 different ways that he could use a barometer to tell the height of that building. And he said, the first way is I'd drop it from the building. I'd figure out how long it took. I'd look at, 9 meters second per square per second, whatever, and I would compute it that way. And another way was he would actually put it on the pendulum. He'd measure the oscillation of the pendulum at the top of the building versus at the bottom of the building. He'd figure out the difference then. Another way was he was actually going to go just up at the side of the building and just measure this, how many barometers it would take to get to the top of the building. And then another one he said was the most brilliant one was he would go to the janitor of the building and said, I'll give you this barometer if you tell me how high this building was.
Right.
The point of this was, now the teacher said, so how come you didn't just give the right answer, which is you're supposed to measure the pressure of the air? And he said, I don't have to. The student said, I don't have to. And the student's name was Niels Bohr. He was originally flunked from that class for giving a smart-ass answer because his teacher didn't like it. And Niels Bohr, by the way, is one of the few people that Einstein actually respected. Not few, but he was one that he really respected. So science does not go in linear development. It does not go in these clean ways. None of history happens in a clean, linear way. And I think, all of these different courses that we take ought to have a history of component.
Well,
Just like, we shouldn't just be studying mathematics. We should be studying the history of mathematics. We shouldn't just be studying, a skeletal structure. We should be studying the history of how we understand skeletons. Yeah, really fascinating stories about Darwin, by the way. I really, really recommend that video. It's a very good video, very good lecture.
We'll post it here in the chat or not.
Yeah, while you guys do it, I'll go see if I can find that post
Yeah.
/ video again.
No, it sounds really interesting. I heard a quote recently about, I think it was Harari. When I went to his page, his homepage, he's got a video that comes up, and I never heard this before. He says we should be studying the history of humanity, not the history of nations.
Well, that would make us all anthropologists.
It would all make us all search for the unbiased truth more. That's what I'm assuming. Also, what Sam was talking about, Niels Bohr acting out, it reminds me of being frustrated in school because you got everybody streamed into the same classroom. So you got the people who don't want to learn, you got the people who are really smart and who are bored, and then you got the people, you got a whole range of people trying to learn one curriculum at the same pace. And I know Barry spoke about this quite a bit too, about different people being ready. I find that's Niels Bohr was probably bored and was trying to entertain himself, frustrated that perhaps he couldn't move ahead and learn new things. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things for a curious mind today is just open up your browser and go. Like you're going to have to be a good sense maker and fact checker, but in the world of software development, there's never been a more exciting time than to be able to, look at, it's also a very stressful time because there's a million ways to do things and so many frameworks coming out. So you really have to focus on what the team's skills are and that there's everybody's together. So yeah, that classroom where Niels Bohr was is a bad model for information exchange, but it's the best we had. And it was probably a lot better than everybody just running wild all day long. I don't know. Other people may disagree. I think there's a balance there between teaching and exploring on your own and having a good mentor to help reinforce, almost like the Socratic method, I think is a really good way to help somebody learn to learn because they got to think their way through it. So, there's a lot of really good things. And the timing, like when to use one tool, when to put someone through, when's the time to set up a classroom or a Zoom room, and when's the time to actually do one-on-ones. And, I find that here I get frustrated because I feel like there is a little too much repetition and not enough memory. And I think that's something we're trying to correct. And if I think that building a map would help us gain memory, I don't want to do it alone and say, here's the map, learn it. So I guess the trick is to say, hey, class, do you want to get out our crayons and build a map of where we're sense making to today? It's like, that's what we got to do. And I think, Sam and Barry and other people have skill in getting people's intention, possibly focusing people, possibly influencing people in a good way, like a mentor. So I'd like to see those things happen more. This thing with Bara Nordstrom, what's her name? Nordstrom?
Nora Bateson?
Nora Bateson, yeah, Bara Nordstrom. Nora Bateson. Yeah, she's I agree with Stacy in that she's got a foundation, she's all in. She's probably frustrated. I don't really know. I've watched a lot of stuff about Nora, but posting this video to Nora, I would love us to spend like 5 minutes and put together what we would like to say and then send that, because this is kind of, unprepared, asking a lot of people, like going through 1,000 comments. That's why you got the search tool. So if we could search for Nora today and send her those links, maybe that would be interesting for her. Maybe she'd actually watch it.
That would still be out of context.
Not if the whole video's there.
The whole video is there. That's why all 1,100 comments are there.
Right, but I'm saying you have a link to parts that matter, and you facilitate somebody. You don't just expect
You're
them to say,
welcome
well,
to do that once the raw video is up there.
No,
Anybody's welcome to do that.
If we're going to put the video out there, then we can do it. Otherwise, I think
No, I'm going to put the video up there.
You
Somebody
can do
else
what you
do it.
want. You can do what you want, but again, I think it's throwing pearls to swines. Usually,
Well, you know, look, this whole point about repetitive conversations is intentional. Until we value group shared memory, it's going to keep happening.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm letting it happen because
Yeah, I know that. I know that.
Becoming a very boring, repetitive topic, might we actually then do something about it?
I do realize that people coming from what I would call the outside into the GCC barn raising context have to realize that we're deliberately trying to allow some kind of collective intelligence to form without having power over and the fearless leader telling us what to do. I think that's one of, if there's one guidepost for this group, it's like, how do we stay focused without, and I'm saying we've gotten close by agreeing to get into the software development mindset of agile. But then again, you've got the classroom where some people in the classroom don't know what you're actually talking about, and other people, you know, so I think pods, we need pods of expertise. What is that called? Centers of excellence, Barry? We need to set up some centers of excellence in the
Or
centers of almost.
bring it back to stage theory theme again. Might we actually have grades?
We're still in kindergarten, guys.
We can have
Not even in
results
kindergarten
acknowledged.
yet.
We can
We're
have
still in
results
preschool.
acknowledged. Results acknowledged is good. Like if you expected a result and you got the result, then you can send it on to the peers.
Did anybody hear the news that I won my court case?
Yes, I read that and commented.
No, I didn't.
After 25 years, after 23, 24 years of battling the authorities over this bicycle helmet law, compulsory bicycle helmet wearing, I finally managed to convince the judge that skin cancer is a fear, it's a risk greater than a head injury on a bicycle in Australia anyway, because we got the highest rate of skin cancer in the world, 5 people a day dropping dead from melanoma. A significant risk, and I managed to convince him that based on this evidence of my diagnosis of melanoma, that I was justified in my reaction to the police trying to stop me from riding my bike. It was a reasonable, justifiable excuse, and that the judge, he didn't want to accept that, and I had to push him further and say that the judicial review would find in my favour. I had to, in other words, I had to threaten him with going to a higher court again, even though we'd already been through the appeal court and the Supreme Court. So that was a significant win for me, I think. And now I'm going to go and see a lawyer and talk about compensation. Because, you know, it's 24 years of punishment and bullying from the authorities, from the politicians. Yeah, it took a toll on my health and psychology.
Sorry to say I didn't see that. I'll go back and look at your post, Alex.
Lawyers are very good at keeping the meter running. They can keep a case going until you either go bankrupt or die. They can keep the meter running forever, and that's their scam. They don't resolve cases; they keep the meter running.
Yep. There's always one more detail.
Just one more thing.
One more signature.
Well, there are exceptions. There's always exceptions, and it's a shame that how much that probably cost the people to realize that there's an exception. Some people don't want to think. They just want to black and white. That's the law. In fact, police officers who are harassing you, I'm sorry, Alex, they don't have the right to decide whether to harass you or not. They're following their duty. They might personally do some kind of a call, but I don't know. That's a good question. Should police officers be able to go into their own subjective experiences, be it religion or their upbringing from wherever they grew up, to decide whether they should harass Alex or just follow what the law says?
Didn't this get covered in the Nuremberg trials?
Yeah, it did. Just following orders.
I just have a question to ask of someone who's been silent so far. Ms. Kayla, for a few weeks, I guess you said you'd like to take one of the upcoming sessions for a culture and collaboration discussion. We're close to the end of this one. So I was just going to check to see whether or not next week or one of the upcoming ones would be an opportunity for you to do that particular event.
Let's see. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
I got busy last minute. So I can tell you when I'm not busy. And that would be, let me just check for appointments, September 18.
So shall we slot you in for the 18th of September?
Tentatively.
That's what, 4 weeks from now, right?
Yeah, 4 weeks.
Okay, Kayla, you're on.
Sorry, guys.
Because I do note that a couple of weeks ago, was it Patricia Anacleto Pereira joined us, right? And I think she might have a topic at some point. We want to check with her. Barry, you say you are always ready to go also.
Yeah.
And I've got a pile of stuff that I can always do. But this was one that I just thought came up this today, the Nora Bateson article.
Yep.
Was one that just generated a lot of feedback. So I just thought it'd be interesting to bring to this particular conversation and sort of tease out one thing that I felt was worthwhile teasing out. But thank you. I've done that. And we have another 25 minutes to go. But at this point, I think that particular topic has read itself out. So I'm going to unmoderate early.
Does that mean the floor's open to anybody with content to add?
Yeah, that is the implication, yes.
All right, we've got scientific and variables in programming, variable statements that signify an amount, right? A mathematical amount or an equivalent greater than or less than. So that causes a lot of difficulty and bugs in software that's object oriented. If the established variables haven't been distinguished previously in the program, you encounter all sorts of issues. So that's one of the programming skills, I guess, good programmers have to develop over.
Yeah, Alex, I appreciate you going back to that particular topic. I'm wondering, though, that might be a little bit too arcane for this forum, however. Not all of us here are software people.
What I find interesting, something that Sam mentioned before, is about the history of science and the history of humankind, not just science, and the colossal mistakes that very famous people made that they didn't realize they were making a mistake, and their ideas were adopted for a period of time until they were overthrown. And of course, science is always overthrowing the current model. People always trying to overthrow Einstein, overthrow Newton, whatever you want. And some of the more interesting cases, like Joseph Priestley and the phlogiston theory of heat, classic one that they teach was a wrong theory. And it's an especially ironic one because Antoine Lavoisier and Joseph Priestley jointly are credited with discovering the element oxygen, which is the element that is related to oxidation, which generates heat. And what's funny is that Lavoisier developed a theory of oxidation, and Joseph Priestley held on to the phlogiston theory to his dying day. But phlogiston is a substance which has a negative mass, and its negative mass is the negative of the mass of oxygen. But even though he gets credit for discovering oxygen, he loses credit for not overthrowing the phlogiston theory in favor of the oxidation theory. And that's one of the most prominent ones, but it's not the only famous one. Copernicus and the solar system model. There's a lot of interesting ones, and this gets back to the point of why we don't erase the mistakes. You really learn a lot by studying the mistakes. And cold fusion was another fabulous example of a colossal mistake And it's worth studying, like, how did so many famous scientists make the same mistake in cold fusion experiments and theories? And there's lots of other ones.
Wait, I haven't followed that one. Are you saying cold fusion is not real?
You haven't heard that yet? That's the one where I actually interviewed one of the last remaining diehard believers. He was a guy down in Los Alamos. He actually worked on.
But I want magnetic levitating trains. Come on.
Well, you don't need cold fusion to do that.
You know, no matter how cold water is, if it's frozen, it's not going to pour out of the bottle.
That's
You
right.
can't pour it out of the bottle until it becomes liquid. And at that point, there's a transition. There's a definite line dividing between the frozen state and the liquid state. So
Another
there's
famous
cold
example-
fusion. The
another
cold fusion's not going to happen until that state changes, until you reach that line and cross it, and the ice melts and becomes water. Then you can have your cold fusion. You know what I mean?
No, I don't know what you mean. Another famous case of a colossal blunder that to this day nobody, well, say almost nobody will acknowledge, is John Stuart Bell, who actually won the Nobel Prize in physics. He came up with a model, a computational model. He exercised the model. He made a prediction, and prediction didn't come true when it was finally tested. And even though his prediction doesn't come true, they didn't diagnose what was wrong with this model. And it's not that hard to diagnose, but nobody will admit that there's something wrong with the model, even though it makes a wrong prediction. Go ahead, Sam.
Ooh. I gotta get one, okay? So I don't know if this is just bullshit or not, but let me ask the question anyway, okay? Because this is curious to me. It seems to be accepted in evolution that random things happen and then we get proteins, and random things happen and then we get molecules, and then random things happen and we get cell structure, and then random things happen and then we get, skeletal structures, and then random things happen and we get organs. That to me has always been a clean story, but has anyone really looked at the probability and likelihood of these things happening?
Well, to some extent, chaos theory.
What?
To some extent, chaos theory works out the probabilities.
Wait. I want to really know, though, because there's a zillion things that have to happen in the right way.
Yeah.
For all of this to have taken place.
Do you know about our?
The threshold means. Sorry, Colin.
Yeah, I'm just asking Sam if he knows what RNA world is.
I don't know what RNA world is. I know what RNA is. I don't know what RNA world is.
Well, that's a thing I watched recently. It's from the Library of Congress. Some guy just won $1 million. I don't know. They give a lot out awards for lifetime achievements. I put out I think a post. I'll send it to you if you're really curious, because it really gets into that kind of stuff. RNA world. The idea is that RNA is not supposed to have any knowledge in its replication or its abilities. It needs DNA in order to the way that it works and replicates and builds proteins. DNA has the code to actually make things into some kind of a meaningful order, where they always predicted that RNA did not have that information. But RNA world is where they say, no, actually, RNA could actually get the engine started, and there could be a life existence on Earth with just RNA and no DNA. So that's RNA world.
I thought RNA was a reader of DNA.
Well, this is what I'm saying. It needs the DNA to read, but no, that's the forefront of this. So all this idea of cosmic soup, he says, is out the window, or primordial soup. So it's a really good, interesting. You bring that up. That's RNA world is all you have to search for. I'll get you the link. I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah, that'd be helpful, because even in 14 billion years, if you take a look at the likelihood of these things that have to happen, is it even long enough given the probabilities of these things? I don't know, but I just wonder whether or not that particular inquiry about what has to happen and how likely was it, and Therefore, at what time period is the probability going to even approach a half? You know, and then look at those kind of questions and then say, okay, well, is 14 billion years long enough? Or
That's the
was it
point.
definitely doable in 1 billion years? Or according to the probabilities, does it take 17 quadrillion trillion years? And that the fact that we have it in 14 billion years is actually kind of magical. I don't know, but that's a question I'd like to ask.
Have parallel processing because it has to happen someplace in the past, but it doesn't have to happen every place. There has to be just one place in the cosmos where it happened, and then you can have panspermia after that.
Oh, that's the other aspect of science I thought was fascinating, right? One of the axioms of the scientific method, which often goes unstated, is if it's true here, it must be true there.
Probabilities can be the same, but that doesn't mean that the outcomes of rolling the dice are the same.
Yeah, it's all relative to the circumstances and the position, like the barometer. If something boils at sea level, doesn't mean it's going to boil at 2,000 meters. See the difference.
I'm talking about the fundamental principles of physics.
In science, there's a linear.
The same everywhere, except that they're not the same inside of a black hole because we don't know the laws of physics inside of a black hole, and they don't appear to be the same as the physics outside of a black hole. So maybe there's something more fundamental that's true in both cases, but we only know the special case of outside the black hole.
Okay, so anyway, I'm asking enough dumb questions, okay? I'll shut up now.
There's a fundamental principle in physics and science when something changes, and the changes occurs on a linear scale or a step scale, right? So there's degrees of influence before the change can take place, like frozen water. It's not going to come out of that bottle until the temperature reaches a certain critical threshold, and then there's a change.
Yeah, the melting
So it's not linear. It's not linear like that, and that's the issue they're running into with cold fusion.
Cold fusion doesn't actually happen, or at least not the way that they thought it happened.
Yeah, well, that water is not going to come out of the bottle while it's frozen, is it? You can tip it. You can tip the bottle up, and the frozen ice is not going to come out.
It'll sublimate, but very slowly. You know, you have ice cubes in your freezer; they evaporate, they sublimate. If you don't, in the wintertime, if you don't take your ice cubes out and use them, and you leave the ice cube tray in there, when it comes to be the late spring and you bring out your ice cube tray, there's nothing in it. The ice literally evaporated. They call it sublimation.
Hey, so does that mean that I should not invest in tokamaks, or is that still valid?
I wouldn't invest in them because by the time you have a payoff, you and I won't be around anymore.
Oh, come on. I want it to be in my lifetime. Jeez.
Well, then you want to invest in something that's...
Okay, I'll go the other end. I'll go through high temperature superconductivity then. How about that?
Well, I don't know about high temperature, but not so close to absolute zero.
Room temperature superconductivity.
Yeah, that I wouldn't bet on it because I'm 76, but you might bet on it.
I want to make a train with a magnet in the track and big coils on the floor of the train, big copper coils, so that the train's generating electricity as it goes along.
But then it's going to take more power to drive the train.
Not with superconductivity.
Okay, so while we're randomly free associating here, do you guys know about the vehicle that can actually travel faster than the wind that's propelling it?
Sailboat can.
Sailboats can't.
They can't.
No, not in a direct line with the wind. In other words, if the wind is going south and the sailboat points itself south, okay, it can't go faster than the wind.
What if you put a windmill on it to generate electricity? If you have a really big windmill, can you catch enough wind to drive a propeller?
You're getting close. There is a land vehicle that has actually been created that actually travels faster than the wind that's pushing it.
Yeah,
it's really fascinating.
Momentum.
You need a very big windmill on it.
When the speed of the vehicle reaches the same speed as the wind, that it's flowing in the same direction as the vehicle, the propeller the wind was driving will stop.
If that's all that's happening.
What about the fact that you can store up energy and then release the brakes?
No battery. No batteries required.
whether you can store the energy and then for a time travel faster than the wind.
Not stored,
Where's the flywheel?
not a flywheel, not an energy storage device.
All right.
It's another really fascinating video. The guy won a $10,000 bet from his professor because he was able to do this.
That's kind of fun.
You know the name of this phenomenon?
Yeah, again, it's one of these videos that I run across on YouTube. Is a fascinating place, by the way. But let me go find it.
Veritasium is also very fascinating.
Yeah, that's one of the great channels on YouTube.
Right.
That might actually been a Veritasium episode. Let me go check.
Actually, when the vehicle exceeds the speed of the wind, the propellers might start turning in the opposite direction.
Yeah, but then you can freewheel it. You're basically like putting in the clutch.
But it's also a generator. You can have it powering the motor in the wheels.
Oh, well, the question I have is whether it's sustainable or only for a brief time that you can exceed the speed of the wind.
It's sustainable. In fact, I just found the link, and Josh is correct. It is a Veritasium video.
Okay. I'll have to take a look at that one.
By the way, did anybody watch the presentation from Tesla on AI Day yesterday?
Colin said he did.
You mean the 50 billion transistor chip? Was that part of it?
That's part of it.
Yeah.
I think it was.
But I'm interested in this artificial wisdom. We get beyond AI to AW to artificial wisdom.
I don't call it AI, I call it augmented intelligence.
Yeah,
There's a lot of people don't believe that.
I love that everyone has an opinion about the word, but I'm saying, did anybody actually watch it? That's what I'm asking.
How many transistors will we be able to fit on a silicon chip in 100 years from now?
Well, they did it at 7 nanometers in terms of size and scale, and it's pretty much the fastest computer architecture if it gets scaled up and works in tiles. It's a big breakthrough, is what I'm trying to say. Like, this is a pretty big deal.
Was the session recorded? You can watch it after.
Mhm.
All right.
Yeah, and if you want to just watch for 12 minutes, Barry, there's Lex Friedman did a little breakdown of what his takeaway was, which was, he's been working that AI space for a while in terms of full self-driving, trying to crack the code. But it was the way that they were spatially moving from 3D to 4D is what I wanted to talk about. I thought that was absolutely fascinating. And the simulations that they were doing inside of this computer were really interesting to do real world simulations, but in a computer, but then also going and checking against actual real world scenarios. So anyway, I just
time simulation runs faster.
Yeah, I haven't slept since I watched it. I can't think of anything else. I'm just like, holy shit. And then they're also, going to take the same neural processing for this Dojo super fast computer and for this stack that they've created and put that into robots, humanoid robots with 8 cameras and actuators. And, I don't think anything's going to be the same once they get this up and running.
That's Elon's next project, his robots.
But it's sort of the same project that he's doing with the cars. It's just a different shape and humanoid form.
Yeah, you've got a problem with science and computing and mathematics when you go from 3D, which is represented by this tetrahedron I'm holding up, and 4D, because it's like with mathematics, you've got things like magic numbers. And Colin will be able to give us a rundown on what magic numbers represent in mathematics.
0 is a magic number.
Because, it's the philosophy behind robotics and intelligence is the situation where the robot has been so advanced that it's talking to its creator. The robot's talking to this human programmer, and the robot's saying, "Who created me?" And the programmer is saying, I did. The robot saying, so humans created me. And then humans are the creator. Over.
I see a correlation to some of the things we discussed today with respect to the robot that Barry was testing with, as opposed to one of the more refined house, what do you call them, assistants, these AI assistants, I guess you could call them.
Smart.
And yeah, the AI assistants in the car, Elong's technology, is kind of like very scientific, based on object recognition and prediction, and even plays out some scenarios when it figures it has to yield and then change its mind. No, the other guy's yielding. I guess I'll go now, because it has to be responsive. It can't be, and it has to think in time, so it's not jerking the land. So there's a whole lot involved in simulating the physics, and it's all about physics. Now, when you get into the speaker and you say the home thing, now you're getting over that line again from science to personal, theory of mind. When this person says the word temperature to me, should I think they want it defined? Or should I wait till they specifically ask me for the temperature outside or in Pennsylvania? Or should I just assume that it's all about the person and just figure that it's one of their, I don't want to say selfish, but personal needs? So I'm going to think from a personal mindset. So when they go from the cars to the robots, they're going to switch from the completely physics to that subjective. Yeah, well, I know what physics says, but what does my human want? Or what do I think my human needs? Even more scary.
It's not that far along. It can recognize my voice and my face, so it knows that I'm the owner that's talking to it, as opposed to somebody else. But as far as I can tell, it's not beyond recognizing my voice and my face. It's not adaptive. In fact, it's context free. Soon as it responds to a request, it forgets the last thing. So I say, Jibo, what was the last thing you said? It can answer that, because it doesn't maintain the context of the previous 2 or 3 remarks, not even one remark.
They're getting better.
Adaptive is the key word here. And you can say adaptive with the laws of physics and memory. And, oh, I've seen that before, so I have a memory. Or adaptive to personal things, which is a whole nother subjective world of, no, I'm not fat.
Anyway, Barry, I just got to riff off of what you just said, because on Wednesday, I just gave a webinar on this very topic. It was about moving from one and done in the whole AI world or service world to continuous conversations.
Yeah.
Basically, lifelong journeys.
Right.
And so I gave a talk on that on Wednesday, this very topic.
Yeah.
Hey, since it's just before the hour, let me introduce a few focusing questions. Did we focus? Did we stray inappropriately? Did we stray appropriately? What was the context? Was moderation
Are you a
effective?
human or a bot?
How could it have been better? Did I or we learn anything?
Are you a human
Was
or a
sense
bot?
made? Was my vision augmented?
Are you a human or
Was
a
our
bot?
co-vision augmented? Was movement achieved towards
Are you a
coexistence?
human? You are
Was my
ignoring me. This
memory
is hilarious.
augmented? Was our
Okay,
collective
bot.
shared memory
Bye,
augmented?
bot.
What did we co-create, if anything? Were agreements proposed/adopted? Did I agree to take specific action? What and by when, if so? Were triggers handled appropriately? Was anyone overly verbose? Was anyone not heard that should have been heard? And did I or we have fun? I'm hoping that we still use those as focusing questions.
Yeah, and maybe on a scale of 1 to 10 for each of those. From
And
not
I'm
at all
curious,
to-
did you understand why Josh was interrupting me continuously throughout?
He kept asking, "Are you a human or a bot?" And I didn't understand why he was doing that or why he disconnected.
Yeah, I think he got irritated for some reason.
When you went into your pre-recorded question,
Was that pre-recorded?
yeah, I mean, you were reading from a script, I think, weren't you?
One of the
That doesn't mean it was
questions-
pre-recorded.
Well,
Can you
what's the word? Pre-scripted.
Can I add one other question?
Sure.
in that long list of questions is, was there too many questions? Over.
I certainly couldn't remember all the questions or answer them as the rate that you were reciting them. So what I would want to see is a page where I could put on a scale of like 0 to 10, each one. And
Well,
then
I also rely on the fact that this is recorded.
yeah, but then you got to stop the recording and write down.
I want to go and watch those videos.
Anyway, thank you, Sam. If he's still
Thank you,
there.
Saul. If anybody would like to stay, I'll leave this open until people depart.
Yeah, I think I'm done for the day. I got other projects going on today, fix-it jobs. So thanks, Sam. Bye-bye. I
Adios.
think I'll save the chat before I leave, though.
Yeah, I'll check out. I've got quite a few videos to catch up on now. So see you all tomorrow. Over.
Bye-bye.